Hi, this is Daniel with Fun Ukulele Projects, and today I'm going to be doing a comparison of 4 concert plastic ukuleles. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. This is going to be the beginning of 2 parts. And the purpose of both of these parts is to not just compare these 4 ukuleles, but to show how construction of an instrument, materials of an instrument, changes the sound. And what you'll learn in these 2 videos will be applicable regardless of what you purchase, whether you're buying plastic ukuleles, whether you're buying laminate ukuleles, whether you're buying composite ukuleles, solid wood ukuleles, laminate, solid, combined, you name it. What you're learning in these next 2 videos will help you make a decision of what to purchase, no matter what you're buying. Now, that being said, I think the #1 factor in purchasing an ukulele is not looking at price, but getting a hold of them and playing them and seeing what speaks to you. Everyone has different tastes. Everyone has different budgets. If you have a set budget, well, stay within that budget and go to a place where you can play multiple instruments and find something that fits within that budget. If you don't have an absolute set budget, well, then go to a good ukulele store like U-Space in Los Angeles, where I go, and try whatever they've got there. Before I purchased my first ukulele, I played ukuleles that were ranging from $70 to $1,500. And then from that range, I found one that really spoke to me as my first ukulele. Now let's get going with the comparison. First off, you notice that 2 of these ukuleles look almost identical. That's because they are. They share the same mold. The only difference is the plastic they're made out of. This one is a Corolla Explorer. They're available in Great Britain. When I purchased it, it was all of, I think, $25, but I had to get it off of eBay, and I had to pay shipping from Great Britain, so it was a little under $50 by the time I got it. Shortly after I got it, I found a company in the States called Vorsen that is selling an ABS version of it. I was able to pick that up for $25. They are polycarbonate and ABS, or I should say cheap polycarbonate, cheap ABS. And true to form, polycarbonate being slightly more flexible than ABS, and ABS being stiffer than polycarbonate, the polycarbonate ukulele sitting in my dining room for 2 months over the summer, right next to this one, in the heat, it bowed up a little bit. The stiffer ABS did not do that. So if you're in an area where you can get one or the other and it's going to be around heat, the ABS one's going to last. It's going to handle that better. Now, being a thermoplastic, it wasn't a problem. I just heated up the back of the ukulele. I've worked with plastics before. I wouldn't do this if you've never tried working with plastics. But I heated up the back to the right temperature, and then I put the right amount of pressure, held it for the right amount of time, and it's as good as new. What I do want to show, as I describe the specs, I'll just hold the ukulele and I'll superimpose a photo. And as you look at the photo, you're going to see that this uses a fan pattern for its bracing. It has 5 fans. It has 2 horizontal braces, one on either side of the sound hole. And it has a little tail block, and underneath the neck it actually has a little, head block, a neck block. And in addition to that, this has 29mm spacing from G to A off of its 35mm nut, and it goes all the way to 45mm at the saddle, which is really wonderful because it has a string spacing more like what you would find on a tenor. The negative to the wide string spacing on a 35mm nut is if you have a lower tension string, you can actually pull the string off the side when doing hammer-ons and pull-offs, so your technique has to be really good. I'll leave that down. Oh, one other thing. Both of these are very resonant. The minimal bracing, the thin plastic, makes for extremely resonant instruments. I found in practice, and I also did some detailed measurements using sound meters, the ABS Vorsen is a little more resonant than the polycarbonate Corolla, and it has a little more sustain. I'm not going to bore you with the test because this video is going to get too long. And I'm already having to break this into 2 different videos as is. What I want to describe now briefly is what you get, the pros and cons of such an extremely resonant instrument. And this will be true whether you're buying a plastic instrument, whether you're buying an expensive wooden instrument. First thing is more volume. And that's great. If you play chord melody arrangements, you don't want to have to really work the strings to get volume out of the instrument. A real resonant instrument will do this. What you'll see when we get to the playing, demonstrating part of this little mini-series, part 2, the negative to a super resonant instrument is that they can sound muddy when they're played really hard. If they're too minimally braced, if the materials are too thin, if they're not thought through, and balanced out that well in terms of the materials that go into the construction, they can sound a little muddy compared to a more heavily braced instrument. So that's something to think about. How do you play? What style do you play? It'll make a difference whether it's one of these cheap plastic ukuleles or whether it's a more expensive instrument, what you're choosing to get. One other thing I will mention about these is that they, when I got them, the tuners on all 3 that I have, the 2 Vorsons and the Corolla, were extremely stiff. But there was a simple fix. I just put a little bit of oil. Like you put some 3M oil on it, 3-in-1 oil, or I just squirted a little WD-40, spun the tuners, and they work fantastic. They worked fine. I've had these for quite a while. I've had them for months, but they've had a lot of use. Let's go over here. This is the Fusion. I think it's Fusion. It's F-U-Y-X-A-N. I gotta stop saying that. What's interesting about this ukulele is this is the quintessential example of using an inexpensive material. It's probably the same low-grade to bottom-tier ABS as is used on the Vorson, and compensating by heavily overbracing. I'm going to say that again. Heavily overbracing, not just overbracing, heavily overbracing. I'm going to put a photo up right now. Take a look at the bracing of this instrument. It has 9 vertical braces in that fan bracing pattern. It has a little tail block put into it. It has 6 horizontal braces, and it has a molded, rather thick bridge plate underneath the soundboard, on the bottom of the soundboard, to give strength to the 4 rivets that hold it in place. It's just really, really heavily braced. And there are pros to that and there are cons to that. One pro, you can use a lesser expensive material and get a very stiff instrument. It has a thicker neck than the Corolla or the Vorson, which once again gives a stiffer instrument. My issue with this company is they claim they have nickel-silver frets. These are a metallic coated plastic frets. And right now I'm going to put up a macro that will show the end of one of these frets, and you'll see the ribs that are in the plastic end of the fret where it wasn't coated. Those ribs are there so that the metallic, I don't doubt that it's a nickel silver coating, metallic coating they put over the fret. The ribs are there for the coating to give a better bite and to last longer. It does not change the fact that they're blatantly falsely advertising what these frets are made out of. They're not nickel silver, they're a nickel silver coating on a plastic fret. Aside from that, there's some really neat things that are built into this ukulele. It has strap buttons, and the strap button up by the neck actually has a little molded, almost like a little nut on the inside to give strength to the screw. The tuners are just okay. One of these tuners is a bit too loose, but it's completely functional. The negative to the overbracing, and this is something that you're going to see a lot with inexpensive wooden ukuleles. It sounds resonant, not as resonant as those. it sounds fairly resonant until you turn it over. This instrument is far more resonant on its back than it is its soundboard. The soundboard should be the most resonant part of an instrument, especially a stringed instrument. So when someone's playing this, if they're holding it too tight, they're muting the most resonant part of the instrument. The plus to this instrument, even though it's quieter, it's actually the quietest of the four. If it's being played really hard, it will keep the clarity a little better. Not as well as the Kala will because of its approach to build, but it will keep it a little better than the really resonant Kerala or Vorsen. String spacing, 27.5 millimeter at its 35 mil net, and then 42 millimeters down at the saddle. So it's not that bad. The negative to this instrument is the fact that both this one and the Kala cannot really have the action lowered that much. I mean, the saddles come out and everything, but I couldn't get them any lower than 3.2 millimeters at the 12th fret, because if I go any lower, the break angle over the saddle gets too shallow. And what happens is this: the break angle, having a steeper angle, is necessary to create the pressure needed to transmit sound from the top of the saddle to the bottom into the bridge and onto the soundboard. If that gets too shallow, then there's not a lot of pressure transmitting the sound that's being generated between the saddle and the nut down into the soundboard, you know, through the saddle, through the front of the bridge. And so the lowest I could go is 3.2. It's not quite as critical on this one as it is on the Kala, but it is noticeable. And when I get to the playing part, periodically, you know, I'll try to play as clean as possible. But since I normally play tenors with, you know, 38 millimeter nuts, wider string spacing. If you hear buzzing, you'll hear it. You may more likely hear it with this one and this one than those. And the buzzing is created from a couple reasons. The metallic coating on the frets is a little less forgiving, and in particular, the metallic coating on the Fusion, you can feel the texture. It's subtle, but you can feel it, just like in the photo that you saw. And I'll put that photo up again real quickly. You can actually see the particles that make up that metallic coating. That means that if I fret too far back, it's less forgiving than the other instruments. And so I thought I'd just mention that. Let's move on to the Kala. The Kala takes a different approach than all three of these in terms of its stiffness. It uses a higher grade material. It uses a drastically higher grade material. It's much more dense. It's much more solid. I'm going to put the bracing photo up right now. Take a look at the Kala. It's heavily braced too. Kalas tend to be heavily braced, but it's not like excessively overly braced. It does have five support fan pattern. It has 6 horizontal braces also, if you count the little brace on the bottom. This doesn't have a tail block, so what looks like a tail block shadow is actually just a little horizontal brace down at the bottom. It also has a bridge plate, and this one has 3 rivets in it. And I'm going to mention something interesting, because I noticed that the Kala's bridge, it feels less stable than the Fusion bridge. The reason I mention that is Kala owners have rather consistently reported either absolutely loving this, or people are saying they're hearing a buzz and they can't figure out what's coming from. Well, those rivets could theoretically work loose in time, just from the pressure of the strings. If something was not put together properly in manufacturing, they could end up getting loose enough to where the bridge isn't necessarily going to pop off, but it would create a buzz, and it would create a buzz that would be very annoying for anyone to find that doesn't happen to have an endoscope and doesn't happen to like to look inside of ukuleles. I have an endoscope because I repair ukuleles. I also restore ukuleles, and so it's a very necessary tool. And that's how I saw the rivets. And they're not as well formed as in the Fusion either. Now, in addition to that, because Kala uses going back to the positives here, a much higher grade much denser ABS. Whether it's more dense because they're using higher pressure in the molding process or what, I can't tell you that. I don't know. But I can tell you this is much more resonant than the Fusion. It's not as resonant as the Corolla or Vorsen, but it's resonant and it has the tightest sound when tapping it out of the others. And the back here is not as resonant as the top, which is what you want. You want a top that's more resonant than the back, but the back still has a nice sound to it. Another nice thing about this instrument is you get that deep sound here, and the back has a slightly different tone to it, and they will blend. This has some sort of coating on the frets. Kala doesn't claim it's metallic frets. It is some sort of metallic coating. I'll put a picture of the a macro photo of its fret, and you can see it's much more fine. It could just be a metallic powder in a paint. It could be a metallic coating. I don't think it's just a paint. I think it's some sort of a thin metallic coat. It doesn't feel like paint. It actually feels like metal. And when you misfret it, it sort of has a metally buzz to it, which is nice, because every element extra that you're having on this instrument is going to create a little more complex tone than an instrument that is just all one material, like you have over here. So anyway, let's get to the specs. This only has a 37 millimeter spacing from G to A and 39 at the nut. And once again, I couldn't get any lower than 3.2 millimeters at the saddle, which creates an issue because for me, when I get to the playing part of this little mini series, if you hear buzzing, it's not usually because I'm fretting in the wrong spot, because actually this is more forgiving. The smoother frets are a little more forgiving. That's why it's important to polish your frets when you change strings. Clean frets will fret better than dirty frets. If you don't believe me and you have an ukulele that you have changed strings, you have for a couple of years, you've never polished it, take the time to polish up your frets and see what a difference it makes. But buzzing here on this one is because the fleshy part of my finger will sometimes touch the string below. And the reason that happens, once again, it's a really high action, and I primarily play chord melodies, so if I'm not super careful, that happens. And since I primarily play tenors with 38 mil nuts and wider string spacing, quickly adjusting on the fly to these littler ones, it can be challenging. I have a Kala soprano with a 34 mil nut, and tiny, it's like 25 millimeters between the strings, and very little distance here between the strings that I was able to set up at the proper height. I can play that one easier than I can play this. The other thing I'm going to mention about the Kala as just watch out for is that quality control seems to be really suspect on these. One company was selling one online that had a delaminating fretboard. It was delaminating from the neck. It was only $19. It was on an auction on eBay. I was trying to get it, but I was busy and my auction got sniped. Mine in particular has 4 significant problems, and I'll bet you can guess what they are. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I got this from U-Space in Los Angeles, and it was great when I was at U-Space. It was great when I brought it home. It was great for about a week, and then these started getting bad. And it's so bad that my G, a right-hander's A, tuner, when you try to tune it down, if you went too sharp, it will go almost 3/4 of a turn before it engages. It will still hold tune when you're coming back up, but that's really annoying. And it used to just be 1. Now 2 more are doing the same thing. And so I was down at U-Space yesterday, and they're going to see about whether Kala will honor that. If not, they'll see if they have a source. Otherwise, I will just get some generic tuners, generic Chinese tuners, or actually I may even upgrade this, put some nicer tuners on it, because I want to use this as a giveaway item. That being the case, I just want to summarize what I've been looking at here. And summarize this because this comparison is also meant to be an instructional video for people purchasing ukuleles. First off, like I said before, do not listen to people that say if it's your first ukulele, only buy an inexpensive ukulele. They have a bias. Don't listen to people say only get an expensive ukulele. They've got a bias. I really like what I was told when I went to U Space when I originally went there. I really like what Hawaii Music Supply says, what the guys at SUS in England say. You know, there's a right ukulele for everybody. Get what speaks to you. And the best way to do that is to be able to go somewhere where you can try them. So find something that fits, that is comfortable to play, that you enjoy hearing, that you're going to want to pick up and play again, because that's how you're going to get better faster. Whether it's a $50 ukulele, whether it's a $1,000 ukulele, that's the best one. The one that you're going to play and you're going to go, wow, I want to play it some more. Or when you have to put it down, say, I can't wait till I can pick it up again. That being the case, if you're holding a ukulele in a store and it's super resonant and you really like that, understand that when you're playing a ukulele that's this boomy and resonant, there will be some pitfalls. One pitfall I didn't mention, I'll bring up real quickly. With this particular polycarbonate model and with this particular ABS model, when this had, especially when this had the Ukuleles on it and that had the fake Ukuleles, I didn't mention that earlier. These have Martin strings. All four of these have Martin 600s, so that what you're hearing is strictly difference in build material and construction, philosophy, bracing. You hear that wah, wah, wah. It's like wah, and then you hear the C. Makes a nice C sound once you get to it, but you have to endure the wah sound. And it was really noticed with the Ukuleles, really noticed, as I said, with the fake Ukuleles. I have another ukulele that I'll show in the next video. At the end of the next video, it's been customized rather heavily. It doesn't make that sound at all. I've modified it so that it sounds really clear and true when it plays the C. Ukuleles themselves are what you're going to find on lots of inexpensive ukuleles and even some more expensive ukuleles when you go to a store, and they already don't have a really great sound to the C oftentimes. If you start hearing that kind of sound, understand those little sounds in an instrument might just simply be a matter of changing strings. So the main guidelines, once again, if you hear a real resonant instrument, real booming instrument, it's nice. It's easy to play and get sound out of it. If you mainly play soft, if you mainly play chord melody, if you mainly play finger style, that's a wonderful instrument for you. If you don't mainly play like that, then it can possibly start sounding muddy. It doesn't mean it's not as good an instrument. It just means it's not one that's made to suit your style. The flip side, you can get a really, really heavily braced instrument. And sometimes companies will heavily brace instruments because they know they're using cheaper materials and they don't want them to fail. Sometimes the cheap materials are in the laminates that are being built, or maybe the solid wood they're using isn't the highest grade of that particular type of solid wood. Or what a lot of Chinese companies do is they will overbrace because they're really using cheap bracing materials. Rather than using spruce, they'll just be using white pine. When I say white pine, think of going to Home Depot and going to the lumber area and grab some 1x4 white pine. That's basically what's underneath, what's bracing a lot of lesser expensive Chinese-made ukuleles. And that being the case, it's not as stable as spruce, which is used in nicer instruments. So what are they going to do? They'll make the braces bigger. They'll put more braces in because the wood itself isn't as stable. The idea is, offsetting instability hopefully makes things more stable. But the price you pay for that is resonance. The price you pay for that is you get something that's heavier than it needs to be. And but every so often you get something that's even inexpensive that even if it's heavily braced, it still sounds nice. And there are things that are advantageous with that extra bracing. One of them is you play really hard, it can be more articulate. Maybe you want something that you can just play really softly, or maybe you not have to play super soft because that's not your style, but you still want it to be more quiet for your practice. Well, then a real heavily braced instrument might be the way to go. Lastly, this is true with plastics, it's true with composites, it's true with wood. Denser, higher grade materials that actually make up the soundboard in the body themselves can produce more resonance. So this is still heavily braced, but it doesn't have to be as heavily braced, and it's still much stiffer. It's still much stronger. And it's a little more articulate. It has no disadvantages, which we'll see when in the playing section. This one is probably the most temperamental when it comes to volume, going up and back down the sound, the fretboard. Anyway, that's the difference with construction. Use some basic principles. You've now been able to actually look at the actual bracing of 3 different, molds that make these things. So you have 3 different approaches to bracing in the instruments. And next video, you'll be able to hear the sound of these as I play different pieces, and you'll see how the bracing and the materials work together to impact the sound. And then that will in turn determine, based on the style you play, which ukulele is most suitable to you. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.